Today we're celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm sorry, Martin Luther King Jr. And my race Kiki is with my fantastic film historian and producer and photographer friend Kevyn Fairchild. We've known each other for 20 plus years, so buckle up. This conversation is going to be incredible. Um, you can find us on Facebook, Race Kikis, Instagram, Race Kikis, and right here on YouTube at Race Kikis with Jonathan Lee. Like and subscribe. Hope you enjoy it. Hi, Kevyn Fairchild. How are you?
Hello, darling. I'm well. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Welcome to Race Kikis.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course. Well, I kind of want to start in the customary way I usually do by asking you my canned question.
Love it. Let's do it.
When did you learn about race?
When did I learn about race?
Mm-hmm.
Probably at a very young age, but it wasn't really until I took some college course at CU Denver that I can't remember what it was called, that I really became conscious about race and implications of race. I was very much raised in the vein of I don't see color, color doesn't matter, and it wasn't really until that class that it was recontextualized in terms of understanding race as both social and cultural constructs and what racism and racialism means and what all those different things mean. And it was at that point that I think I probably looked back on my life and really began to understand the implications of race and how that impacts all of our lives and the way that we see each other and the way that we see ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Was this around when we met?
No, it was actually long after. This wasn't until probably 2002, 2003.
Really?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I've, and again, because I was raised with the notion of, I don't see race. And, full disclosure, there are a lot of people in my family that have very problematic views on race and racial relations. And so I kind of grew up knowing that and knowing that that wasn't the beliefs that I held. And so I tried to live my life without any sort of racial animus. But I didn't really think that critically of it until everything sort of was contextualized in that class.
Okay.
And so I became a lot more sort of aware of things like, microaggressions and the way that, people treat each other and actual like issues of systematic racism as opposed to just, people in my family referring to Martin Luther King Day as James Earl Ray Day, right? So it's like there's a very different sort of thing. Knowing that that was obviously not appropriate, but like not fully understanding what that actually meant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's very interesting. Looking back on over our many, many moons of friendship, I can't think of one moment where our race difference has ever been an issue.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. Because I think we've also probably talked about it a fair amount, but I can't think of anything. I think there are things that we shared that I don't know if you want me to bring up, but looking back on it,
Wait, what are you talking about?
I always think of Shirley Q. Liquor and the idea of like what that is, and then also being sort of like a gateway to acceptance Do you know what I mean? Like sort of saying like if a person of color says it, then it's okay. Like do you know like what that sort of looks like?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
that's literally the only instance I can sort of think of. And it wasn't until recently I even really understood who Shirley Q. Licker was
Yeah,
and how problematic she is. So
yeah, that was kind of a mind fuck for me, to be quite honest. When and then to reflect on my participation in that is even worse.
yeah.
Um, the one thing that I can think of is how we met, but that's a whole nother Oprah altogether. Um, I'll give some context. Um, it took me honestly until Ben's birthday to. All right, I'm
Own
going to
it.
give everybody the backstory. Kevin and I met when I was 24 years old, and you were 19 or 20.
Somewhat sure.
Hmm?
Yeah, somewhere in there. Probably 19, I think.
I think you were 19.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was a dancer for a drag queen, and I did all kinds of festive things in very little clothes.
Yes.
And but I was a dancer, and I
I know
had
you
just
were.
gotten back from tour, and then I had broken my jaw and gotten the wires off, so I couldn't go twirl anymore. So I had to go get a job. And here we are sitting at Stutzman County State Bank
Yep.
customer service.
Yes.
And
Oh,
we
the
have to
days.
stand around and tell everybody, hi, my name is. And here I am. Hi, my name is Eddie Jackson. I'm a dancer. And you look at me and you say, what?
You're a stripper.
I said, I'm a dancer and I work for a drag queen.
And it wasn't until a couple years ago when I finally got you to understand that when you start your evening with more clothes on than when you end your routine, then you're a stripper. But, it's fine.
That was my 20s. Everybody was a stripper in their 20s.
Everyone was. You were in your 20s and the 90s. Everyone was taking off their clothing. It was fine. And by the way, no shade on strippers.
Oh, God, no.
Like,
Oh, I
God bless
stripped
them.
my way through Colorado. You had a great time.
Exactly.
Sorry, Mom. I don't think she knew that story. Anyway, um,
Thank God cell phones didn't exist back then
oh
with
my
cameras on them.
God, I know. But I was interested in talking to you specifically about the media aspect and how we have demonized blackness through the media that we've been fed. Namely, so I've been reading Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi.
Mm-hmm.
And he brings up Birth of a Nation, which is the first film. And I've been reading a lot of other books, and they also make reference to that film.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
Okay, so a couple things with Birth of a Nation. Birth of a Nation is nowhere near the first film. Birth of a Nation is 20 plus years into the world of filmmaking.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So, I mean, it came out in 1915. Cinema came about late, 1895, 1896, 1897. So we're deep into the world of filmmaking. The reason why people keep going back to Birth of a Nation is because, and for those of you who don't know, again, it was released in 1915, directed by D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith is sort of known as the father of American cinema, right? It's through D.W. Griffith films that we get a lot of the advances in visual storytelling through cinema that we take for granted today, right? So when people talk about the Birth of a Nation, they're like, oh, it's the first time a close-up was ever used. It's not the first time a close-up was ever used. It was the first time the close-up was used in order to move the story forward. And arguably, I also think it's canonized as the first in all these different things, right? The first time you have a film of this length, which is true, it was the longest film. At that point, it was 12 reels. Each reel is about 10 minutes long, right? This is a very long film. It's about 3 hours long. So it was much longer than what you had seen before. The continuity of it was much longer than you'd seen before. And the complexity of the storytelling and the editing and the way that it was constructed was probably more than you had ever seen before. So I will give it that. But I would also argue that 90% of all of silent cinema is lost. So we don't know what had been done before Birth of a Nation. What we know is Birth of a Nation is the earliest surviving example of a lot of these things, because, you know, D.W. Griffith is sort of sainted in the film theory world as the father of everything, which I think is total bullshit. Anyway, so Birth of a Nation, which was actually originally called The Klansman, is really about sort of telling what they at that point in time thought was a historically accurate story of the Reconstruction in the South, right, of that period in time. It's not until much later we find out that that's not at all the case. But, you know, and race relations, there's a great film theorist by the name of Linda Williams, who was the chair of the film department at UC Berkeley, who wrote this great essay talking about Uncle Tom's Cabin and how, as problematic as Uncle Tom's Cabin is, had actually started to move race relations forward in this country, where, I mean, she says something like, you know, men were seeing weeping in the theaters, right, watching this story and seeing the plight of, you know, black men, everything they had gone through. And so really, so things have sort of started to change, and then along comes Birth of a Nation and completely reverses that. And it reverses it in a very specific way of showing, so first of all, there are no actual black actors in the film. It's
because they're in blackface.
Correct. It's all white men in blackface. Because we have segregated. Obviously, they're not integrated in any way in that way. You're dealing with a lot of the tropes that had been around sort of in the deepest racist notions of Reconstruction America. And you're literally, the climax that most people sort of turn to is a man who has taken a woman captive in a cabin, and he's going to sexually assault her.
A man in blackface.
A man in blackface, correct.
Yes.
And literally the screen is whitewashed by the Klan, the actual Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, saving America, right, from the savage, from the people that we are taught to fear. And the tropes that are really sort of laid out in Birth of a Nation still are a lot with us today, right?
Exactly.
So, but I also want to say that it's not just conjecture that this had racial implications. The Klan was actually using Birth of a Nation as a recruitment video. David Duke even said, who was the former Grand Poobah of the Klan, said he would just turn the movie on and walk out of the room, right?
Exactly.
Because it elicits all those fears, it elicits all the emotions that we have been taught through media, through family, through everything else throughout the years. But it's also because this film holds such a special place in history, people are taught the film over and over and over again. And it's very difficult to make it through film school. It's very difficult to make it through college, where you take a film appreciation class where you don't see the Birth of a Nation. And too many people don't teach it in the context of what it is. And there's actually now a number of professors who are basically saying you can't separate Birth of a Nation from cinema history, because it is a landmark piece of film. But that doesn't mean we have to watch it, right? You can watch Judith of Bethulia, which came out a couple of years later, and say, okay, he's using a lot of the same stuff in Judith of Bethulia, right? Is it the most progressive film on Earth? No, it's not the most progressive film on Earth. But it's not Birth of a Nation, right? You can look at other filmmakers who are using the same thing, and you can look at those examples without having to perpetuate all the subtextual elements within Birth of a Nation.
Right.
Those things can be separated. But it's also important to remember that, you know, there was pushback. Like the NAACP was fairly new at that point in time, but they were protesting the film, right? There was pushback on this, so it wasn't universal acceptance, but it was damn near universal acceptance, right? I mean,
I can appreciate the fact that you said that there is pushback, but that's like an ant pushing against an elephant.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the film critics at that, like one film critic is literally saying that, you know, the worst thing about the film is that it was made, right? I mean, it's like, that's this film that does all these horrific things. The worst thing about it is the fact that it ends, you know, which is ridiculous. And, you know, it was the truth written in lightning, right? And so, and that's how it was presented. And there was so much pushback that D.W. Griffith actually then makes a sequel to Birth of a Nation called Intolerance, where he basically doubled down and really talked about how he was very upset that people were so upset about the fact that he made this film about, you know, the KKK will save America. You know, and the problem is that we're taught in film school, we're taught Birth of a Nation, we're taught these things, and we're not taught Oscar Micheaux, who was a black filmmaker who was making films at the same time, right?
Really?
Oh, black filmmakers have been there from the very beginning. Black women have been there from their beginning, because remember, there were, what we know of today, we sort of think of as the silent cinema, was always sort of like the dominant corporate world of silent cinema, and we sort of think like everything was done by the studios, and that indie cinema was invented in the 80s. It wasn't. There's always been independent cinema, and there was huge black cinema played primarily in neighborhoods of African Americans. There was Jewish cinema, there was Yiddish cinema, there was Polish cinema, there was German cinema. There are all these different cinemas that were made specifically targeted for audiences that the larger industry wasn't necessarily addressing.
Okay.
One of those filmmakers is Oscar Micheaux. Prolific filmmaker, writer. He made a lot of films that dealt very specifically with race. He got pushed back a lot. I mean, his father was literally a freed slave from Tennessee, right? He got pushed back because of the way he was sometimes, you know, showing the community, which, again, those criticisms continue to today, right? So using certain language, not what we would today call code switching, but these are all black casts, all black actors. Like, it was very much, I hate saying this, but he was the Tyler Perry of his day, right?
I understand that.
And much like a lot of the other filmmakers, a lot of his films didn't survive. But a lot of them have. And in fact, Kino, a distribution company that specializes in a lot of older classic cinema, just released a 900 and some odd minute collection of early African American cinema.
Really?
And it's clips and films that have been sort of reclaimed, because again, a lot of this just sort of disappeared, because we didn't have any sort of notion of film preservation in this country really until the 60s. This film was all shot on nitrate film stock, which spontaneously explodes. So a lot of it was just lost in fires and warehouse fires and studio fires. You know, the negatives are all gone. And a lot of this is just, they're literally just pieced together out of prints that they can sometimes find a reel of a film somewhere in a dumpster, or someone's collection at home, that they have a reel of a film that they can sort of piece together the footage from.
Let's talk about the things that our parents watched and the things that we watched that I feel like I can remember when we were younger, and the TV shows we were watching and the movies we were seeing, and we only saw black guys, black women as whores or prostitutes. Either way, whores, prostitutes, they all get paid. You saw them as welfare queens. You saw them drug dealing. If you saw them on the police force, they were always dirty. But then it's this thing about othering I'm still obsessed with, that I've been obsessed with recently. And I'm thinking, or at least the thought process is, if this is all you're seeing, and no one like me lives in your neighborhood, when you go out in the world, it affects how you react to people like us. And it affects how you vote. And it affects who you interact with. And it affects all of these things.
No, it absolutely does. And it impacts the way that we see and understand each other, because we don't, if we don't know anyone who doesn't look or sound like us, and this is universal, right? It's not just race. It has to do with gender. It has to do with sexual orientation. It has to do with being transgender. It's literally it's the intersectionality of all these things. If you don't know someone who is insert whatever here, then the way that we learn about people is through media. And as much as we would like to say, oh, it's just pretend and it doesn't matter, that's not true.
That's not true.
Because it does matter. Representation absolutely matters. Particularly when it's and then you pair what you're seeing on television, what you're seeing in the cinema, with then what you're seeing on the news.
With what you're seeing on the news.
Correct.
Which is always hyper focused on targeting exactly, and they know exactly the words to use.
Yeah.
That are coded in such a way that you know exactly what they're saying.
Absolutely. And so it's literally what is supposed to be the factual reality then backing up the narrative, the fictionalized world, right? And those two things work hand in hand. And what you then also see is, you know, it's not just people like me who learn about people like you. It's how we learn about each other as well, right? And yeah, and those stories are very much written in and coded in that, you know, I mean, this is not my personal lived experience, clearly, but I've, you know, read and heard people talk about, you know, growing up as, you know, a young black man, your options are athlete or gang member, right? Like these are the things that you think about when you're growing up.
You mustn't forget rapper.
Or rapper, sorry.
You mustn't forget rapper or pimp.
Right. Well, you know, we all need a pimp, but only if you dress right. But it's clearly. But, you know, so those are the stories that we actually teach that other people are watching and internalizing, and the idea that you're having to then fight against those sorts of things because you're not seeing positive role models reflected back at you.
And you're not seeing yourself positively reflected back.
Right. And then what you end up having is a situation like, you know, I mean, certainly, oh, man, I cannot believe I cannot remember his name right now. I really wish you edited these so I can take this. Norman Lear. Okay. So Norman Lear really went out on a ledge, right? Because it's Norman Lear who gives us Sanford and Son. It's Norman Lear that gives us the Jeffersons. It's Norman Lear who really steps out and says, okay, we're going to face this head on, right? We're gonna look at Archie Bunker and we're gonna say, you know, this is what's happening with Archie Bunker. And Norman Lear did incredible things for television, right? Although I think that with enough time, Archie Bunker stops becoming a villain and he starts becoming an ideal. Even back then, he probably was. But what you then begin to sort of see is the evolution of two sort of sets of media happening, right? Because then you essentially have a segregation of storytelling.
Exactly.
Because you have all black stories then, like the Tyler Perrys of the world, the Spike Lees of the world. You have all of that where it becomes purely black storytelling or purely white storytelling. And that's not a great thing either. You have, like, you know, there have been a lot of studies that have done where they talk about how media can absolutely, in pop culture, and we're speaking largely of pop culture, can really push people to greater ideas of acceptance and anti-racism and being conscious of racism and racist ideologies. But that's best done when they're actually interacting with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're watching, so the Jeffersons is one thing, but it's when the Jeffersons interact with the neighbor upstairs.
Right.
That becomes something different because it's like, oh, wait, these two worlds can actually intersect. They can exist together. They don't have to be completely separate, right? You have the Cosbys next to Family Ties, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these
Mm-hmm.
two things are very different, very separate. Never the twain shall meet. And for me, that's where I always get concerned. Like when you have, the establishment of the Black Entertainment Network, which is remarkably important because there was no representation, but
Right.
then the sort of the corporate idea of the world says, oh, well, we've taken care of that. Now we don't have to diversify mainstream television as much because people are satiated because they can just get BET.
Yes,
So
they have a
NBC, exactly, they have a channel. So
channel.
NBC, CBS, Fox, all these other channels, all these other mainstream things don't have to wrestle with this. We can continue churning out this product,
Mm-hmm.
which, unless you're not white, Christian, heterosexual, cisgendered, to you is normal.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that was the other thing that sort of that was the light that really clicked on for me in that class. The idea of whiteness as neutrality, and anything that is not neutrality, anything that doesn't fit that mold, is actually then counter to that. It's
Mm-hmm.
other, right? It's literally other.
It's literally other.
So you're used to seeing yourself on screen, and I think that what happens with with non-white, cisgendered, straight storytelling is that people who have never had to translate anything, people who have never had to look at what's happening on screen and feel empathy for a character who has a different lived experience than they do, suddenly they have to do that. And that for them becomes very uncomfortable to have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like I don't see myself in that character because they don't look like me. And so I'm uncomfortable with having to then translate whatever their lived experience is and how that meets mine. And then that ends up with all these marketing techniques and all these marketing campaigns of saying, oh, it's a universal love story, right? So you have to basically remove all the non-neutrality out of the story just so you can sell it to
Mm-hmm.
this dominant audience,
Mm-hmm.
Which is ludicrous, right? Because if you can't have empathy for a character who doesn't look, sound, and act like you, then you need to check your empathy meter.
That's not something that we promote as Americans. That's not something that we even believe in.
No.
It's terrifying.
It is. It is. It's really terrifying. And I would always think about that when the bakers would be, oh, I cannot simply bake a cake for a gay wedding. I always think to myself, do you know how many mo's have put on your weddings and kept their mouths shut?
And kept their mouth shut.
Like,
do you know how many of us have done your hair? How many of us have done your taxes? How many of us have mowed your lawn? How many of us have filed your whatever? How many of us are there? And more importantly than that, what always drives me crazy about that is, how is my marriage affecting you in any way?
It's not.
Whoopi Goldberg said this perfectly a couple of years back. If you're against gay marriage, don't do one.
Don't have one. Yeah.
Don't have one. If you are against gay marriages, don't get into a gay marriage.
That's pretty simple.
I don't know how my happiness should affect you at all. How it will affect your family at all. How does that affect your family at all?
No. But it's that fear of having to then accommodate for something else that's not yourself, that the dominant culture has never had to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean, the Annenberg Foundation does work, and hold on, I'm going to bring up some actual numbers here. I know it's crazy, but they look at feature films that are released every year. They look at the top 100 films that are released,
Mm-hmm.
and they look at it in terms of inclusion of women, inclusion of all non-white groups, of LGBTQ characters, of everything. And for 2019, they don't have the 2020 numbers out yet, obviously, because it's still 2020. Of the top 100 films, had 32 of them had leads in them that were non-white.
32.
32, which is by far the highest.
Okay.
Right? Underrepresented women was 17 in the lead, right? Which is, again, higher than has ever happened before. But depressingly, inclusion of all racial and ethnic groups on screen in 2019, right? Percentage of all speaking characters, racial ethnic group, white was 65.7% of all speaking characters.
Mm-hmm.
Black 15.7, Hispanic Latino 4.9, Asian 7.2, other 6.6. Right? So one of I went to a really great discussion one day where a lot of producers were sort of talking about inclusion and how to become more inclusive. And someone was talking about how they were talking to a set designer who had a wall of photos of doctors. Every single one of those doctors was a white man.
Mm-hmm.
And someone just said, why? Why can't you just have some of those doctors on the photos on that wall not be white men? And they were just like, well, I don't know. I just never really thought of it before. You know, or just like when you have an attorney in a film,
Mm-hmm.
the default is to have a white attorney. Why does it have to be? Unless it's a black film, right?
Unless it's a black film.
Correct, and that's the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why not just begin to incorporate these types of characters into a film? Like, you know, you don't have to. They don't have to be white. What we have to get over is that fear of saying, okay, but then white is neutral. So if I cast someone who's not white in that role, then suddenly it's an Asian lawyer. Or suddenly it's a black lawyer. Because again, it's not neutral.
So I have a question. In that room, how many of the people in that room that you were in, how many of the people look like you?
Oh, most of them. Well, actually, most casting directors are women. The vast majority are white women.
Most white women?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I know that. In fact, I have that exact number. If you give me just a second, because that's something else that they look at. 71% of casting directors are white women.
Which would explain why, if you cast what you know.
You cast what you know, right? You know, and then that's cyclical, right? And so you cast what you know, and then the defense in the industry is often, oh, well, I have to sell this film, and I can't sell the film if I don't have Channing Tatum in it, because Channing Tatum gets me the money to make the film, right? Okay. That argument is not wholly wrong, but it's emblematic of other issues that the industry has. But then the question then should be, okay, one, what do we do about that? And two, fine, you have to have Channing Tatum in it, but can the second person? You know, like, can we just diversify the rest of it in front of the camera? And then we also need to diversify what's happening behind the camera, because again, like, the more people become involved in the process, and the more people, it's about relationships. It's about the people you know. The more the people you know that don't look like you or sound like you, the more they actually become involved in the process. And it's also important that when you're bringing someone into the process who is trying to diversify or be more inclusive in what it is that you're doing, that you actually listen to them. That Pepsi commercial could only happen one of two ways. One, everyone in the ad agency in the boardroom at Pepsi was white, or the people who weren't did not feel that they had the power to speak up.
What Pepsi commercial?
The Pepsi commercial with what the pop star, what's her face, where she goes up and puts the she hugs the cop. Remember there was a protest line, and it was like right around the beginning of Black Lives Matter, not this last year, but a couple of years ago. And there's a line of protesters on one side and a line of white cops in riot gear on the other side, and she breaks with the protesters and goes up and gives the cop a Pepsi and hugs him, and it was like this whole, like, if we could all just have Pepsi, the world will be better. I can't remember who it was. It was like Ariana. I can't remember who it was. Hold on, let me just look it up real quick. Kendall Jenner. Sorry. Yeah. So it was Kendall Jenner who basically just, breaks this line and goes up and she makes good because she gives the cop a hug. No one in the line of everyone who approved that thought to stand up and say, maybe this isn't right.
No, that's a cash grab.
Like,
that's pure and simple, a cash grab.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that no one who was in charge of writing that looked like me.
Oh, no one who was involved in the process at all. But again, we don't know that for sure. It doesn't matter if they were.
Yeah, but all of that's just capitalizing on, you're trying to profit on pain.
Oh,
and
it is.
That's disgusting. It's just
is.
absolutely disgusting.
But the secondary level of that is to say it's not good enough to have people in the room. You have to have people in the room, and the room is a space where people can actually have dissenting opinions, right? Because there could the DP for that could have been black. I don't know that for sure, but he or she did not. They did not feel empowered enough to be able to say,
we shouldn't do this.
Maybe we shouldn't do this.
Maybe
right?
we should. This is wrong.
This is kind of like this isn't a good thing, right? Or to step into someone and say, you've heard me go off on it, and I will continue to go off on it until the day I die. The film Detroit. No one stepped in and said, Catherine Bigelow, you're probably not the right person to tell this story. Find someone else to do it. Right?
I didn't see. I purposely have not seen that because of your hate for it.
My
purposely chosen not to see that. I did watch Suburbicon. Is that what it's called?
Oh, with Matt Damon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I loved that film.
Yeah.
I loved it. I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about gay cinema and gay media and the problematic tones that we see a lot there.
What do you mean? Everything's fine.
Oh yeah, everything's fine if you're a white guy with blonde hair and muscles and you have a fair amount of money or a large penis.
Well, it'll get you everywhere. Yeah, I mean, the lack of inclusion is not exclusive to straight cinema. Top 10 films, my favorite films of all time is still Moonlight. I think Moonlight did things that very few other films have done. I'm assuming you saw it.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Barry, we were talking about the beginning of the film and how the studio wanted him to subtitle it. Because they're using language that not everyone may necessarily fully understand. And Barry said, no, I'm not taking my black voice to the white ear. The white ear will come to the black voice.
Exactly.
I think, the reason why something like Moonlight stands out so much is because there's so few things that are like it. Which is a shame, right? It's, in the height of queer cinema in the 90s, like you have things like Watermelon Woman. You have things that, again, because the cost of production went down significantly, people were able to begin doing things. And, that was always the hope. right? That's the hope of sort of you can make a film with your phone, which means anyone can do it, and now with YouTube, anyone can distribute it, right?
Mhm.
Which is fair to say, and it's accurate to say, but it's not free to do it.
Well, what I'm saying about that is I can think of probably five of my favorite gay movies of all time, and none of them, no, outside of Moonlight, none of them have a cast that look like me.
No.
We just watched, oh God, what was that thing Ryan Murphy put on?
Prom?
No, well, we loved that. That was amazing. My only distraction was James Corden. That was my only
Yeah.
distraction.
Well, that's a lot of people.
The one before that with, oh
Oh, Ratchet?
no, the movie with the gay guys. The band played on, the boys in the band.
Oh, yeah, but that was not original.
It wasn't original, but his
Right.
staging of it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll go you one better. It's not even that. I mean, you have Roland Emmerich, who decided that he would completely whitewash Stonewall,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm. And
Um,
and felt like it was okay.
oh, he defended it.
And the studio gave him money for it and said, "Oh yeah, let's just do that."
No, he defended it. Roland Emmerich totally defended it. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, whatever. Um, I mean, yeah, it is absolutely an issue, and you would hope that a community that understands being othered would not do that, but
There are two gay movies right now on Hulu. Happiest Season.
hmm
It's with two rich white lesbians going off to do rich white lesbian
of
things.
course.
And then the other one is about a white gay guy going back home to his white family and falling in love with the handyman with shoulder pads or something. It's all this. It looks like a Hallmark movie for gay people,
Right.
and it's it's still infuriating that 20 years later we're still doing this same story. I can think back to um, queer as folk parties at your house where I would never see myself.
No. I mean, come on, you had Noah's Ark. Why are you complaining?
I loved Noah's Ark, but it didn't have nearly the same push
No.
or the same following as those greased up, barely mediocre white boys.
Yeah. It just in my soon to be released podcast, I'm launching a new show. The first thing that we actually do is Queer as Folk, and you know, one of the things we talk about is that it is unforgivable that the show was that white
Hmm.
from a larger perspective. I mean, it is white through and through. It is
Through and through.
it's not just the main characters, right? It is the background characters. That show is white as hell. But it's also not that unrealistic to say that none of those characters would know people of color,
That is true.
would interact with people of color.
That is true.
And, one of the things that a lot of filmmakers are now sort of struggling with is the idea that when you're telling films that take place in a different time, you would not have had a world that looks like the world as it does today, right? There was that movie of the suffragettes that came out with Meryl Streep, who's in it like 5 minutes,
Hmm.
and very, very readily criticized for being an almost exclusively white film. The filmmaker's defense was, yes, but in England, in London, at that point in time, it was largely a white women's movement. I don't know that that's a good enough reason anymore.
No.
And I'm starting to see more shows that are set in historic periods that cast non-white actors in roles, and then they just roll over it like it's nothing, because it is nothing. Because again, whiteness is not neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
We have to remember that. If those of you who are watching today remember absolutely nothing else, whiteness is not neutral.
It's not neutral.
Right? It means something. So we have to be able to get through that. So when you're dealing with something like Queer as Folk, I would love to say that if it were made today, it would be completely different. But, the L word was recently redone and doesn't look much different. So I don't know that it necessarily would.
And what's really odd is the story could still be told exactly the same way, because you can, as a white professional gay, completely segregate your life.
Yeah.
You absolutely can, and the only time you have a black man in your life is if he's over there to take care of some things for you.
I remember when I first moved to New York, kind of having come up through the scene in Denver, we had bars. We didn't really have bars for different scenes because I don't think there were that many of us. There weren't enough of us, really.
It felt like it.
It was more just days of the week. Just like where you went days of the week.
Yeah.
But, when I came to New York, when you talk about going out to the gay bars in New York, it's literally like, okay, what's your type?
Mm-hmm.
If you like Asians, you go here. If you like Latinos, you go there. If you like white guys, you go there. If you like black guys, you go here. Like, it's literally, the bars are literally utterly segregated.
Completely.
By race, by scene, by everything else. And so, again, it's perfectly reasonable that you could live your entire life, even in the great city of New York, and never have to deal with or interact in any meaningful way with someone who doesn't look or sound exactly like you.
Exactly.
But we still have to be able to do better. And, I don't think that queer cinema is any different than straight cinema in that way, right? Like, we all just have to be able to do better and do it in a way that doesn't just fetishize, right? That doesn't just then build on, the notion of the BBC or the submissive Asian or the, whatever nonsense that we all, kind of play with in bringing the porn world into the regular narrative world.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to do that, and it's highly lacking. But I would actually argue that queer cinema is largely lacking.
Excuse me.
So,
yeah, you're right.
And
the cinema that is out there is trash. No, I won't say all of it is trash, but a large percentage of it is trash.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, like why were there 17 eating outs? I don't understand.
I don't know.
Who's financing them?
I don't know.
I don't,
Some the old dude who's probably in politics. That's who's doing it.
Clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we as storytellers, we just have to sort of think about doing a better job and understanding that, and again, in the perfect ideal world, it wouldn't matter, but we don't live in a perfect ideal world, and so it matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the perfect ideal world, all of it still matters. I feel like we all have the right to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. I don't mean that literally. Don't go up and feel people. That's weird. It's not the 80s anymore. But you understand what I mean by that. You walk into a room, and I want you to see and appreciate and luxuriate in my blackness. I want you to.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I'm learning about asking my opening question, when did you learn about race? I've asked that to only white people so far. And everybody tells me of a moment. They never make reference to white as a race. No one has ever said that.
And it's funny because that's literally, it was in that class where that white not being, that's when it really clicked for me. Is all of a sudden I was like, wait, hold on.
Wait.
Wait. Wait, white isn't normal. White is white. Like there is no normal. Like what is like that's when it like blew my mind. It's like
Yeah,
this notion of like, oh shit.
because you can be no matter what, your base is always white. It's always
Yeah.
normal. So you can be as individual as you want to. Your base is always normal,
Yeah.
which
Always normal.
is infuriating when that's not the case for the world. That doesn't make any sense.
No.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why we all agreed to these set of stupid rules.
Well, I mean, we
Well,
didn't
we didn't
agree to
all
them.
agree. You guys set them, and we had no say so in it.
I mean, yeah. To the victor go the spoils.
Mm.
Um, and that, and there's power in that, right? I mean, when you can sort of define what is and what is not normal, there's immense power in that, because
Hmm.
then you can then control the narrative, right? And it's not just in the really overt ways. I think a lot of us have really begun to understand the overt moments of racism, right? Not everyone, clearly, but I think that a lot of people have. What I think people are starting to finally come to understand are the more unconscious ways
Hmm.
that this plays out,
Hmm.
right? Um, an organization I worked with had a mentorship program, and we went to great lengths to anonymize the applications through as much of the application process as we could to remove any and all identifying markers for race, gender, orientation, whatever else that
Hmm.
we needed to do, because we wanted it to be as blind as possible. Um, and that was a very remarkable, that was a very difficult thing. Um, and when you're part of a group that has benefited from that, it's very difficult to deal with the world when that starts to go away, right?
Hmm.
I've had many conversations with my dear and loving father, who has grown and changed exponentially on his own journey with these issues, who gets very upset about things like NAACP scholarships and this idea of reverse racism, and that oh, they're only for black people, and I have to tell them no, they're not. HBCUs don't only admit black students. What was it, Morehouse 3 years ago or 4 years ago had a white head of Morehouse. Like, this is not, because white, again, we are so used to saying that when you promote something, when you celebrate something, when you have pride in something, that is to the detriment of everyone else. So when you have gay pride, when you have black pride, when you have indigenous pride or Asian pride, automatically that gets translated in our minds as to the detriment of white people. Um, and then, this sort of idea of affirmative action. And I keep having to think to myself, he's like, oh, the best candidate should be the one to get the job. In an ideal world, yes, the best candidate should always be the one to get the job. But, you know, when people get upset that someone of color or someone who's not white, by POC, gets a position, or they get a hand, or when you have like language in hiring processes where they're specifically trying to look for underrepresented communities in a certain profession, the immediate thought is, oh, well, they're just going to get the job because they're not qualified, just because they're by POC. That completely forgets the hundreds of years that the white candidate was not the best person to get the job, who got the job because they were not, because they were white, they got it over another candidate. So we're going to completely ignore that, and we're going to hyper focus on this point in time when that's the feeling of, oh, I'm going to miss out on this job because I'm white. Do you know what I mean?
I've had people make statements like that back when I was a corporate Barbie about the affirmative action thing.
Yeah.
And what it boils down to is just for me to be in the room, I have to be more qualified than everyone else there.
Yeah.
I've had to do everything possible just to be in that room while you're skating through on D's.
Correct.
Or you're just skating through because you know a guy you're walking around while white.
Yeah.
So that is absolute absurdity.
Yeah. It's totally forgetting the notion that it is the exact opposite has been true for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, you know what? If someone who is slightly less qualified than I am because they don't have the background, they haven't had the opportunities that I have, ends up getting the job because they're a better fit for the candidate and they're a bi-POC, you know what? I'm fine with that.
I can assure you, you will not suffer. You're fine.
I'm fine.
You will not suffer.
No.
A white man without a job is, I won't even finish that statement.
But we're having to be competitive for the first time in a way that we've never been having to be competitive before. We're having to be competitive against women. We're having to be competitive against, people who are not white. We're having to be competitive against all these things that has never happened before. And it's frightening as hell because all of a sudden you're losing the advantage that
being mediocre.
You never had.
Yeah, you're losing your advantage of being mediocre.
Absolutely.
And
that's scary.
It's scary because now your whiteness is
It ain't enough.
All of this, I think people think that if Black people have rights, they take your rights away. Right.
Because that's how it's been.
If we all are treated fairly, you lose out. That's not how rights work.
Well, it is how we've made rights work.
That's how we've made rights work. Because in order for you to feel like you're successful, someone else has to be less.
Correct. Right. That's how we've done it. And so automatically, and by we, I mean, white cis men.
Yeah.
That's how we've done it. That's how we've run things. And so automatically we just assume that's how everyone else is going to run things.
Yeah. And now we say, no, thank you. That doesn't work for us. And the one thing, I've talked to my mom a lot, and she says, well, baby, I was around for the first time. I was like, yes, Mom, I know. And she says, well, these Black kids aren't like back in my day. Y'all have it much more together. And I was like, we're trying.
Yeah.
But not even me. I'm in my 40s now. So my job is to just talk this. I just want to talk it all out. This doesn't make any sense to me. It's all so stupid.
Yeah.
I've always thought it was so stupid. And I know a lot of really smart people who believe in the most stupid things.
Yeah. Because, it's not been challenged.
Yeah.
Right? It's just sort of how things go. Like our dominance, our neutrality, all of that has not been challenged in any meaningful way, right? Mm-hmm. And so what has been challenged before has always been able to be folded into our system of power somehow, right? And that's when you get into the idea of like hegemony, and where a dominant force is going to be able to maintain that power as long as they can sort of take enough elements of the counterculture, fold it into the dominant culture, and then own it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is largely what happened to a certain style of music. Well, a lot of styles of music.
Like all styles of music?
Yeah, right? So you have, then if we can own it and we can make money off of it, then it's okay because then we can control it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's when those systems begin to break down and you have the ability to reach audiences, you have the ability to circumnavigate that entire system, that things can actually sort of break loose. But, this is sort of where I put my other hat on. Never underestimate the power or the ability of any dominant system to stretch as far as it needs to in order to maintain that power, right? Because there's always going to be some level of gatekeeping. So it becomes something where, yes, the phone democratized cinema. Well, okay, but that's great, but you're not going to make any money as a filmmaker,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you're not going to be adopted into any way where you can actually reach a wider audience until you can show that you have financial viability,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now we're out there creating all this content and you're creating it for free. Well, you're still not a paid professional, and so you try to go get work and it's like, oh, well, you just did this thing. So it's all these systems of gatekeeping and moving the goalposts and saying, okay, well, yes, you made it this far, but, now we're looking for this. Or, and it's all that way at the same time of then celebrating, like, oh, look at this great job that XYZ person is doing. Look, the system works.
The system works.
Right? For the longest time it was, oh, look, Condoleezza Rice, the system works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, we're not racist. Oh, there's no racism, because if there were racism, Condoleezza Rice couldn't exist.
Yes.
There would be no Oprah.
There would be no Oprah. But Oprah, Beyonce, Jay-Z, all of those, we only have a few.
Yeah.
White success is so commonplace that there's so many we can't name.
Yeah.
So when that is your argument, you have Beyonce. Okay, you have hundreds of others.
Okay, well, you have Miley Cyrus. What's your point?
You have Miley Cyrus. You have, oh God, the Kardashians. No, they're Armenian. Never mind, they're Armenian.
They're their own thing.
They're their own thing.
Either you have Oprah. Okay, well, we have Barbara Walters. You have, you've got Martha Stewart, who somehow managed to go to prison and come out. Anyway,
come out as an active pothead. As an active pothead, which I'm a huge fan, but she's now friends with Snoop Dogg, and we've normalized that. We've normalized weed, marijuana, when we have millions of black and brown people in jail for an unimaginable amount of time. We legalize it now. What do we do about their lives, their lost lives?
I mean, that's why, a lot of, like, New York and New Jersey right now, the state legislatures are locked in terms of passing legalization laws, because it's the realization that you have to then deal with the decades. I mean, because literally pot was actually made illegal specifically to target the black community, right? Like, it's been well documented specifically to shut down black activism.
Yes.
So, now what do you do with that, right? Well, what you should do is you take everyone who's ever been, convicted of possessing what is now legal amount of a substance, and you commute their sentences and you remove it from their records, because they should not have been convicted for something that shouldn't have been illegal to begin with. But you also then take and you say, okay, but now you have a community that has been directly adversely impacted by this set of laws. Now we need to make sure that we try to address that when we're writing the laws, because what happened in Colorado is that suddenly all these growers are getting licenses. They're all white. So now all of a sudden, like, you're again gatekeeping to keep out of that. So how do you then address that issue to make sure that you're not doing it to perpetuate the system that it actually built? And that's a very difficult issue.
That's a very difficult. And then you have to address, what do you do with them? These men who have done nothing more than walk around with a joint. Maybe they had a joint where you would get slapped on the wrist. I would go to jail for X number of years. And you're able to live your life and go out and prosper and grow and experience. I'm in jail. I get out of jail. Now I'm an ex-con.
Yep.
Now I'm an ex-con. You've commuted my sentence, but that's 20 years of my earning potential has been robbed from me.
I mean, well, I mean that gets into a whole other issue of dealing with reparations and what that begins to look like. I mean, not specifically for that issue, but just like how do you take something that was so reprehensible for so long? You're never going to make it right.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't. Like that can't be the goal. The goal cannot be to make it right. You know, Germany does a lot of really interesting things in trying to grapple with World War I and World War II and the Holocaust, right? They do, because it's like we have to acknowledge that this happened. We don't want to promote it. Like it's this very difficult sort of thing. So how do we as a nation come together and say, okay, something like really horrible things happened. We cannot change the fact of that of the past, right? And are we directly the ones who did it? No, but that also doesn't matter because we benefited from the system, from the people who did it. So that argument is absolutely moot. Doesn't matter. I don't care if I'm a slave. My ancestors did. That's the issue. How do you begin to unravel hundreds of years of systematic oppression,
Mm-hmm.
not just writing a check to make it go away? Because that's not the right answer either.
No.
And you can't, you know, a kid who is 18 years old gets busted for a joint, does 3 years, where I would have gotten to get home safely, and then puts him into a cycle of, you know, the school to prison pipeline, puts him into a cycle of having to deal with all these issues that he ends up paying for this one thing that he did for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that?
How do you deal with that? And then who gets to decide how to deal with that? Because most of the time when it gets to policy level, a lot of the people writing those policies haven't ever been in the communities they're writing the policies for. Correct. So they're writing policies for things they have no idea about.
And they don't involve the people who were actually there, or they do to a certain extent, and it's like, okay, well, I've had your input, but we're still going to do this other thing.
We're going to do it this way.
Right.
Because this way it's going to save us money, and then this lobbyist is going to give me this amount of money, and then I'm going to get these stocks from this guy, because it's mostly just about me.
Yep.
And about my family and about my reputation.
Correct.
And I can put this on in my cap and say, look what I've done.
Yep.
But the people who are most in need never, when they do get whatever it is, it's never enough and it's never the right thing. Right. It's a lot of the wrong things, but never the right things.
Yeah. No, it's true. And it's not a conversation that I think we've even begun to be prepared to actually have, but it's a conversation that's simultaneously long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, if we can't even grapple with police violence bad, how can
I think I have a thought about that, because in white eyes, through white eyes, the police are there to protect and serve. You always have the assumption of innocence. Always. Even if you are standing with a gun and a person is laying on the floor, you have the assumption of innocence. Mm-hmm. Walking around as black or brown, you have the presumption of guilt. Always.
Right.
Always. So when we're saying defund the police, when we're saying police violence, when we're saying all of these things, even when you are seeing the narrative of police executing black and brown people, it is then usually followed up with news reports justifying that murder.
Correct.
And so it paints this idea of this dangerous, brute, black, brown person coming for the safety of the white people, and who's going to stop them except for the cops. The cops are here to protect me from them.
Yeah.
And so when we say defund the police, what you, I don't mean you, but what is heard is who's going to protect me from them.
Right.
So now I have to go get a gun and I have to arm myself because they are coming after me. But no one's coming after you. We are all trying to live our lives.
And when, you know, to bring this full circle, the idea of someone coming in to save you from the big, brutish, horrible, black, evil man and whitewashing the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Birth of a Nation.
Birth
Right?
of a Nation.
I mean, that's very much where that comes from, and this notion, and it's, you know, people, you know, and then people like here on Staten Island, with Eric Garner, right? There was a black cop who was there, right? So, oh well, it was so bad. Why didn't he stop it? It's like, well, it's a very complicated question because it's not internalizing those feelings, and it's internalized by everyone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's not as clean and clear, but to the white eye, when someone who looks like the victim stood by and did nothing, that means that it was okay.
Yeah, that he had it coming.
Correct.
He deserved it. But then that makes the cop, the police officer, judge, jury, and executioner.
Correct.
And
that's always bugged the hell out of me. Like, I don't understand, like, you know, that's always bugged me.
yeah,
Because it's also the same group of people who believe in the Constitution, who
Mhm.
are such stalwarts of the process, all of a sudden are like, oh, well, this cop can decide that, oh, the person was guilty of things before, has always had a problem with him. He's always been like, you know, specifically with Eric Garner, he's always been a problem. The cop knew him. He's always the guy who does this, so it's okay because we know him to be a criminal. Well, last time I checked, selling Lucy's is not a capital offense.
It's not an execution. It's not worthy of an execution.
No.
Yeah.
But complicity, and that's you know where it becomes very complicated. And that's why I always try to watch films that are specifically dealing with issues of race. I mean, I have no other way of watching it, but like trying to see what a film is telling me as a white person. Like, where is it giving me outs? Where is it giving me moments to say, okay, that was bad, but it was justified? Where is it saying to me that, oh, it's okay, this isn't really challenging what your beliefs are? And that's the main issue of many, but that's the main issue I have with Detroit, is that it raises all this emotion constantly, but then it gives the white audience the out of saying, oh, this isn't really what happened, so it's okay, right? Or whatever. Like, it's always giving you this sort of sense of saying, oh, but it was a white cop who helped him at the end, so that's okay. So, like, not all cops are bad. Okay, great. Not all white people are bad. Okay, great. That's awesome. So that's fine, right? So we can deal with that, but at the same time, not realizing that you're then ingesting that every other person in the film who was not white is suddenly horrible,
Right.
and there is no out there. So, you know, and the idea that a lot of people still don't really understand when they're consuming pop culture, because you always hear, you know, oh, well, you're just overthinking things, you're overanalyzing things. It's like, well, no, you have to think and overanalyze it, because you're consuming something passively that's actually giving you a very specific message and reinforcing a very specific ideology. And if you're not conscious about that, then you're literally drinking the Kool-Aid. Right?
You're literally drinking. You're literally sitting there being programmed.
Yeah.
To react exactly the way you're supposed to.
Correct. And how all of that then reinforces itself. You know, this idea of, oh, well, the crimes in the black communities, or the black and brown communities, the poor
Mm-hmm.
communities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, yeah, it's there largely because you're looking for it there, because you thought that it was there, and so lo and behold, where you're looking for it, you find it.
But
If you
more
were to roll out
importantly,
to white suburbia, you're going to find just as many people smoking pot. You're going to find just as many people doing illegal drugs. You're going to find just as many people doing all this bullshit.
even more
You're not looking
actually,
for it.
even more. But if you, my thought about this crime, because I'm reading, so you want to talk about race by Joma Ulo. I'm saying her name wrong, but she's talking about. God, I lost my train of thought.
We're talking about white neighborhoods and black neighborhoods and crime, and looking
Yes.
for it.
So if you do a deep dive on crime and you figure out why crime,
Yeah.
you know that there will be crime. And if you mix no opportunities, you mix no education, you mix drugs, you mix addiction, you mix mental health, that's a recipe for danger. Because if you have nothing and everyone around you has nothing, what then do you do?
Yeah.
Am I justifying crime? No, but I understand it.
Right. And it's, what do you have to lose? Like,
You have nothing to lose.
there's
Because even if I have absolutely nothing, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you have absolutely nothing to lose.
Yep.
And you're not thinking, I'm going to kill this person, but you may be thinking, I need to eat. I need to feed someone. I've been robbed before. I absolutely have. And I've freely given my money because my life isn't worth my money.
No.
And more importantly than that, I can get more money. If that is a choice that no one just chooses to be a criminal. Well, that's probably not true.
Yeah.
But
I wouldn't say nobody, but yeah.
I wouldn't say nobody, but if you're robbing me when I barely have anything, if you're robbing me, you must need it, and I will gladly give it to you.
Yeah.
I will gladly give it to you to keep you safe that night.
Well, I mean, the thing that we try to do, I think particularly as Americans, but we really like to oversimplify things down into binaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're looking at something, we try to find the cause, right? The cause is this. Well, the vast majority of things that we face don't have one single cause.
Absolutely not.
Right? It is an intersection of things
Exactly.
that come together to create an environment for something. And so even if you were to come into something and say, oh, we can cure this one portion of it, well, that's great. You cured this one portion of it, but you're neglecting the 12 other things that combined with that to create the situation that we're actually in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and again, that makes it very easy for people who want to argue against that to actually defend the status quo, to be able to say, okay, well, the statistic for this doesn't show that. Okay, well, maybe you're right. The statistic does not lead to that, but you're leaving out all these other factors that impact what that actually is, right? And so you can't just look at this and say, oh, it's this that's causing it, because it's not just that.
It's not.
No, it's multiple things.
A dozen different things.
It's
any different person.
Yeah, absolutely.
In any different person. We are all mixed bags of things that collide and connect with one another to explain where we are in our life.
And we are really good at, when you hear someone like Bill O'Reilly talk about, one of the great confrontations is Jon Stewart taking on Bill O'Reilly for growing up in Levittown, right? Mm-hmm. Where Bill O'Reilly's like, oh, lift yourself up by your bootstraps, blah, 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 nonsense. And Jon Stewart coming at him going, yeah, but you grew up in Levittown, which was literally a community that was built with the assistance of the government to give white people the hand up. So you can't sit there and say, oh, this person doesn't deserve government benefits because of how their government benefits look different than your government benefits.
Exactly.
No, you both got government, but you're both getting government cheese. One's in a red package, one's in a blue package, but guess what? Both government cheese. Don't know how to tell you that. Like, you're benefiting from this, whether you want to admit it or not. You are. But it looks different, so that's okay.
It's okay because we deserve this.
Of course.
We deserve this.
We worked for it.
We worked for it. This is our country.
Yeah.
They're just they don't deserve it.
We built it. You didn't build it. We built it. We built the culture. We were the heads of all the movie studios. We were the heads of all the television. We're all the musicians. We're all the heads of the record labels. We were the people who wrote the Constitution. We built it. It's ours.
It's ours.
Nonsense. Utter nonsense.
Utter nonsense. On that note, darling, thank you so much for our chat.
Thank you. I'm sorry we went a little long.
No, this was perfect. Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
So did I.
Such a good time talking to you.
I know.
And I will see you on Wednesday.
Ooh, yes, Wednesday. I'm looking very forward to it.
All right. Have a good night.
Talk soon.
Ben, my love.
Will do.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.